Okay. So, yeah, lovely to be here with you. My name is Suryagupta. And yeah, I've not been at Dharma Night for some time, since pre-pandemic, giving a talk. So it's great to be back and meeting you all. And I'm going to be talking, giving some reflections, sharing some reflections with you from this book, the Dhammapada. And the Dhammapada means the way of truth. Dharma means truth. Pada is footsteps, or the way of, path of. And it's actually sort of the original teachings of the historical Buddha 2,600 years ago. And it's a collection of his teachings that he gave in lots of different situations. So he might have encountered somebody and speaking to them very directly, or it might have been a whole assembly of all the monastics he was teaching to, very particular circumstances, particular people, always trying to communicate to what was in front of him, what was needed at the time. And all these sort of teachings came out of that. And then what's happened is they were committed to memory. It was very much the oral tradition, committed to memory. He actually had one of his attendant, his main attendant, Ananda, was one of the people that had this prodigious memory. And every time the Buddha gave a teaching, Ananda would hear of it and would sort of remember it. And eventually it was passed on. And several hundred years later, the teachings were written down. And the Dhammapada is a collection of some of these teachings under particular themes. And, so I've been given a chapter called Flowers. And it's all the teachings the Buddha gave that mentioned flowers. It's actually quite different to, I don't know how many of you have read Dharma books, Buddhist books regularly, but these days, many books are sort of people's interpretations, sort of how they've interpreted it, how they live the Dharma and what they've discovered by it, or they are taking an original text and explaining the text. So it's actually quite unusual to have a book like this. It's very accessible, that is actually purely just the Buddha's words. And it's very direct. It's very simple, if you like, simple but profound, very direct. It's basically saying, this is just how it is. This is the teaching. This is the truth. And then it's up to us to go, okay, let me take that in. Yeah, let me reflect on that truth. There's no dramatics in the book. There's no great stories. It's just, here it is. You want the truth? Here it is. And and it's interesting because actually, if you read it as a kind of like a great sort of like novel or something like that, you'll probably find it a bit dry, actually. Because it's not meant for that. It's meant for reflection. It's meant to take one teaching, read it as I did. When I was preparing, I was like, okay, let me read the chapter. And I just allowed the particular teachings that jumped out at me to jump out at me. And that's kind of how you're engaging. And then if you find one teaching, that's enough. You sort of just reflect on it because it is very profound. And one of the things this is about, I actually have two copies of the Dhammapada. I've got the original one that I bought many, many years ago. I didn't bring it with me tonight, but it's a tiny little penguin classic. You literally can fit it in your pocket. And my copy is sort of very yellowing now and very aged, but it's very precious to me, actually. It was the first time that I actually read the Buddha's words. And then we've got Bhante Sangharakshita's translation to the teacher who founded this centre. And this one came out a few years after I found the Dhammapada. So actually I'm exploring both. I'm going to be sharing the translations from both tonight, with you. And I think the only other thing to say about the Dhammapada, well, Bhante is quite interesting because he talks about his relationship. In this copy, he talks about his relationship to the Dhammapada. And one of the things that he says really sort of touched me. And he said that before he came back to England to start this movement, he was teaching, he did a course for the Dalit community in India. And the Dalit community are sort of the the ex-untouchables. They're sort of really at the bottom of the caste system. And many of those communities, they embraced Buddhism, they converted to Buddhism. And but then their leader, Dr. Ambedkar, who sort of inspired them really to convert to Buddhism, he died suddenly. He died 7 weeks after, many of them became Buddhist. So they sort of converted, and they converted to Buddhism because Buddhism was a religion the Buddha, the historical Buddha, basically refused to acknowledge caste, rejected the caste system, rejected that kind of discrimination. He could see the suffering it caused those people, but the whole of society as well, and he rejected it. So they felt they could be Buddhist and actually find their own dignity. But their leader died 7 weeks after they converted. And so whilst they were sort of Buddhists, they actually didn't know the teachings. So Bhante Sangharakshita, engaged in teaching them. And the first things he was teaching them was the Dhammapada. And it was the first time they had heard the Buddha's words for them, given to them for their situation. And Bhante says how incredibly moving it was. It was as if they were meeting the Buddha for the first time themselves. This man who hundreds of years before had rejected the caste system, who gave them a sense of their potential. It was as if they were meeting them, and Bhante described it as very, very moving. Many of them were uneducated, illiterate, and yet they were able to understand the teachings. They were able to, because they're direct, because they're simple, they were able to understand how to practice it for themselves. So they felt Buddhists. They felt they had a path that would lead them to freedom. So that's a bit about the Dhammapada. And yeah, I've got the chapter on flowers, the flowers of life, my translation says. And of course, as soon as I knew I was speaking about flowers, I began to reflect on flowers and began to see flowers everywhere, as one does when you begin to tune your mind. And I realized, how pervasive flowers are in our society. Actually, many societies throughout time, flowers have sort of had a very important part to play in our lives. I was thinking, actually went to a wedding at the weekend, a wedding reception, and of course there were flowers there. But of course you've got that very, I don't know if it's an English tradition or a kind of European or Western tradition, but that throwing of the bouquet, yes, where the bride throws a bouquet behind her, and there's a scuffle often to kind of capture the bouquet. And it says if you capture it, then you are next in line, as it were, to have the wonderful experience of marriage. So that's one tradition. And then of course we have funerals. Which is it's interesting, isn't it? Why have flowers at funerals? For me, it's something around you sort of recognizing the preciousness of the person who's died and the fragility of life. Yes, the flowers, they're delicate, aren't they? So they're delicate and yet they're beautiful. And in a way, when you have flowers at a funeral, you're recognizing that the preciousness, but the fragility that person has just exhibited by passing away. So we have them at funerals. What other occasions do we have them? Actually, I don't know if they've banned them now, but at hospitals we used to always take flowers to when people were sick. You can't obviously do much when you're sick, so you're there often with four walls, and it can be quite drab. So having flowers there, it's uplifting, and it also connects you to life. There's something sort of that has come from nature there in your room. That's really helpful with all the sterile equipment and things like that, as well as the scent. So that's another occasion that we have flowers. But flowers are deeply symbolic because for all kinds of reasons, but they're full of color. Color in itself is symbolic. Colors represent something. So white represents purity, for example. Red is sort of transformation. So colours really, speak to us. And then, of course, you've got the scent of flowers. So flowers express something. And again, actually, one of the last senses I think to leave us when we die is our sense of smell, apparently. And smell really evokes memories. So you can smell something and it can take you back 20 years, 10 years, back to your childhood. But it also, smell actually evokes emotion as well. If you think about essential oils, why we have essential oils is because it induces a particular mood. And then you've got the shape of a flower. So when something's at its peak, it has this perfect shape, doesn't it? And then when it is no longer at its peak, the shape begins to, dissolve, to fade, pretty much just like us. Yeah. So all these things make flowers a very sort of symbolic thing, really. And many religions from beginning of time, would have flowers in different ways for us to reflect on. So I'd like you to reflect on flowers now. Just something, what point, if you can think of a memory or moment where a flower or flowers, really came into your mind. It might be that you were given flowers, or that you gave flowers. It might be, seeing a flower represented. There's that famous artist, is it Louise Bourgeois, who paints these huge flowers, and they're amazing. So it might be that you saw flowers represented somewhere. It might be going off running and seeing, I've had this experience, running or walking and suddenly, out of nowhere, like a crack in the pavement or in a wall or something like that, there's a flower and you think, oh, how does that grow? So just have a think about flowers, a moment that brings flowers to mind. And if you like, I don't know about flowers, I'm not really feeling flowers, I'm not really a flower person, then how does that feel as well? Just have a moment. And I'll ask one or two of you to share. Okay. Anyone got a moment? Yeah?
There's a house of food doors down from me that is, it's on the corner and it's actually kind of covered in flowers. It's got the most beautiful garden, but there's one kind of a yellowy peach coloured rose in particular. It's a bush that kind of extends beyond the fence. And every time I go past, I just have to stop and smell and take it in. It's just the most heavenly scent. It's kind of, reminiscent of some sort of a sweet wine or something. It's just
what feeling does it evoke for you?
Ecstasy.
Oh wow, okay. Because that's the thing, you've got this experience of seeing this flower, this particular one that draws you in, and actually it's the experience is one of bliss by the sounds of it. Yeah. Okay. Any others? Thank you. Yeah.
I went to Regent's Park last month, and they've got a nice flower garden there. Lots of different flowers there. Really nice. Lots of nice smells.
Okay. Did you sort of did it evoke, so Regent's Park, lots of flowers there. Did it evoke any particular feeling for you?
Lots of life.
Life. Yeah. Okay. So it's like an abundance of life there. Yeah. Thank you. So I'll share a couple of mine. I when I actually became chair of the London Buddhist Centre, we had this ritual, this sort of great ritual, and people at the end gave cards and incense, and I ended up, me and a family friend and a family member and a friend, we ended up going back to mine, and we were all laden with tons and tons of flowers. It was I never had that many flowers all in one go, and so I sort of put them around the house, and it was amazing. Every time I woke up, moved through the house, there were different colours and different scents, and it was just so rich. And then I watched them as time went on just fade away, you know, like every few days I put another one in the bin and, you know, another one in the bin. And then finally, though, there was this one flower that just one single white flower that just seemed to last. And I kept thinking, when are you going to go? You know, and it just lasted and lasted. I think it was about like 3 weeks or something like that. There's just one single flower. So that was a really lovely a beginning of being a chair. And the other one actually is when I was giving a talk, and I was telling a friend probably a couple of weeks before the talk that I was doing this talk, and I was a little bit nervous about it, really, for various reasons. I was like, oh, I don't know, you know. So I was just talking it through with her, and that was that. And then on the day of the talk, I was still kind of working with a little bit of doubt, I guess, thinking, okay, it'll be fine. But, you know, I was talking, you know how you do, you talk to yourself, you know. And then the door knocked, and there was this bunch of flowers from this friend, you know, a couple of weeks previously. And she just said, the message was, yeah, I'm thinking of you, just well done for stepping in and doing that. So it wasn't about the performance, as it were, how well I did or anything like that. It was just her recognizing that I was going through a process, and she wanted to have a sense that, you know, she wanted to be alongside me in that moment. So I was really moved by that. So flowers have all kinds of symbolism. They're very rich in meaning. And this is why the Buddha in the Dhammapada sort of uses them as part of his teachings, as a way to reach people in different situations, different contexts. So the first, I'm not actually going to, as I said, I'm not going to read the whole chapter. If you've got this book, please do read it. I'm going to do what I suggest, is kind of read it and then see what jumps out. So the first one is the very last verse. And it is this one. So even as on a heap of rubbish thrown away by the side of the road, a lotus flower may grow and blossom with its pure perfume, giving joy to the soul. In the same way, among the blind multitudes shines pure the light of wisdom of the student who follows the Buddha, the one who is truly awake. So that's from the Penguin edition. So even as on a heap of rubbish thrown away by the side of the road, a lotus flower may grow and blossom. So that is really key in Buddhism, just that. Even as on a heap of rubbish. Now we ignore rubbish, we don't like to see rubbish. We think it's unpleasant. We want to, bypass it, right, usually. Nothing to do with rubbish, do we want, normally? But what this is saying is, even as a heap of rubbish discarded, a lotus blossom may grow and will grow and blossom. A lotus flower will grow and blossom. So this is a very key teaching, if you like, an image in Buddhism. And you've got lotus flowers here. I think you can probably see lotus flowers at Kew Gardens, but apparently they're beautiful flowers. And the key thing about a lotus is that their stems go right deeply in the mud. So this beautiful flower grows from the mud. It goes from all this murky stuff, basically, but it grows. And it's a real important metaphor for us as human beings. What it's basically saying is no matter what your circumstances are, no matter what your condition is or has been, you can grow from it. You can develop from it. You can actually be free of it because the petals free themselves, they're open. And it's a very important moment in the Buddha's actual life too. The lotus serves a really important moment because the Buddha gets enlightened. Siddhartha, the man who's striving and struggling and trying to figure out how to free himself from suffering, he finally sits down and, meditates and realizes the truth, becomes free, becomes emancipated. And he spends 7 weeks or so absorbing the experience. And sort of towards the end of that, he begins to wonder, how am I going to communicate this? My experience. How can I communicate in the enlightenment experience, the freedom that he experiences to ordinary beings, to people like you and me? Because he knows, he's sort of been where we are, as it were, and he knows that most of the time we're not thinking about freedom. Most of the time we're caught up in all the stuff we get caught up in. We're caught up in trying to just get through life, surviving, making a living. We're caught up with our sort of frustrations and being restless. We're caught up in basically the ups and downs, the highs and lows. We're caught up with our sort of ambitions and our competitiveness and our, pettiness, all the things, all our irritations. That's actually what, our ordinary mind produces a lot of. It produces a lot of stuff like that. So how from that do we actually focus on the possibility of freedom? How do we really take that really seriously? The Buddha recognizes that there's a real journey to go from where we normally are to where he is. So how can he engage us in it? So this is a question that he has, that people are they gonna get this? Are they gonna understand? Are they willing to do the work to get here? How am I going to communicate this? And at that point, he has a vision, and this vision is of a lotus pond, and he sees these lotuses all at different stages of development. He sees those ones that just, poking through the mud. They're just got their tip, if you like, just emerging from the mud. He sees the ones that are, above the mud now, but their bud is still closed. And then he sees them, open, and then he sees them, a few that are fully open to the sun. And then he understands that there are those who, well, actually, I think there's two things. I always like this story in two ways. He sees that there are those who are ready to receive the light of the sun, i.e. the light of truth. There are those who are ready to grow, to develop, to consciously grow and develop. But I also see it as he sees that we're all at different stages of growth, and that we're all looking for the light. We're all wanting it, no matter what stage we're at, no matter even if we're still submerged in the mud. There is this movement towards the light. There is a sort of desire, if you like, for the light. And it makes me think of those biology experiments you used to do at school, if you did them, photosynthesis, I think they were called, where they kind of, they would put plants in different set of conditions. And I always remember the one where, obviously, if they put a plant without any nourishment whatsoever, it would die. So no light, no water, etc. But there were those experiments where they would put a plant in a cupboard or something where there was only a little bit of light that would come in, a tiny little bit of light that would come in. But that plant would grow. But it would grow slightly distorted, and it would grow towards where that light was. So we're like that. We're like that. On some level, we want truth, we want love, we want awareness. And there's all these other conditions that actually we've got to get through and have to get there. So the Buddha sees this, and in a way, he sees two things. He sees our potential to grow, but he also sees what keeps us submerged, if you like, as well. And that's all our conditioning, all the various things that, our backgrounds, our families, religion, culture, all of those things, they might be positive things in them, obviously, there are, but there's also distortions, there's also biases, if you like. They're also laying all of those conditions, they're like obscure, they're sort of layers we have to kind of understand and obscure who we really are. So the Buddha sees this. So the Buddha recognizes that everyone's moving towards the light. Some of us are very open to the light, but they were all stages of growth, And so he goes to teach, knowing that we're submerged in the mud, but we all want the truth. So that's the lotus and that particular saying there. And let's see what else it says. Yeah, so then it says, in the same way, among the multitudes shines pure the light of wisdom of the student who follows the Buddha, the one who's truly awake. So of course, the more we sort of open to the truth, to awareness, to ourselves, our true potential, the more we kind of connect with the light, the more we become that. And then of course, we can then be that for others. And you'll find this if you're meditating. You meditating will have an effect on you, but the people around you. Eventually, people around you will kind of go, okay, there's something going on that's a bit different now with that person. They might even get curious. You're already representing a light for them as well as for yourself. So yes, I like this because this idea of the lotus, the image of the lotus, because no matter how hard things get, no matter how challenging things are, we can grow. That's really what it's saying. I've been reading the Man's Search for Meaning about, his experience in the concentration camps in Germany, and it's incredible. Actually, it's a very strong read, of course, but it's incredible how some people there were lights to each other, and how he had to go through a process of, he couldn't do anything about the conditions he was in very much, but he could change his perception. He could change his relationship to them, and that was his way of freedom. Yeah. And he managed to serve, and he survived. So the next one. We all want to grow, but it's not easy, is it? Meditation isn't easy. Practice isn't easy. It's a challenge. So we have this aspiration, but we also have what we've come with, our conditioning, and at some point, the two things, we have to be in relationship with each other. Our desire to change and grow and develop, but also what we've come with and who we are. So it's not easy at all. And I think in Buddhism, we say there's three aspects of ourselves. There's our body, our speech, and our mind. And all of those things have to be involved in order for change to happen. So our body is our actions, our speech, obviously what we say, and our mind, our heart, is our thought processes and our feeling processes. All have to be engaged. And I'm sure we know that, probably at the beginning of the year, we're June now, aren't we? So I'm just curious, how many of you set New Year's resolutions or intentions? Just put your hands up. How many of you set them? Yeah. How many of you remember what they are? It's not easy, is it? So you do. Good. Well, that's good. So what happens is we have this strong feeling of wanting change or thought of change. Then we might declare it to ourselves, which is a really good step, or we might speak it to another. This year I'm going to do X and Y. But the actions are a whole nother thing. Yeah, the actions to get our body into gear, to follow what we've said or what we're feeling, is a whole nother thing. And we know that from any habit that we're trying to change or give up, it's the action that gets tough. So the quote, and it's from Bante's book here for the Dhammapada, is, like a beautiful flower, brightly coloured, but without scent, even so useless is the well-uttered speech of one who does not act accordingly. So like a beautiful flower, brightly coloured, but without scent, even so useless is the well-uttered speech of one who does not act accordingly. Have you had those experiences where you're going to go towards a a beautiful flower or something like that, and you think, oh, and you move towards it and you smell it, and it's like plastic. It's that kind of experience, or as which actually I'm probably more used to actually. I'm more surprised these days when it has a beautiful scent actually, because of the way they grow and transport them and things like that. But the other example I had was plastic flowers. You go into a place, you think, oh, it's really, gosh, that looks amazing, and you go towards it and you realise it's actually plastic. Actually, it took me quite a long time to appreciate flowers, because in my household, Caribbean household, my mum used to have lots of plastic flowers. She used to grow flowers, so she was a great gardener, my mum, but somehow within the house was plastic flowers, which would gather dust, and so I just was like, never drawn to them. So in a way, this phrase is a bit like that, the saying things, well-uttered verse, this well-uttered speech is basically, saying beautiful things, uplifting things, inspiring things, things that you think, oh, that'd be wonderful. Or even our resolutions and intent and our intentions. Oh, I'm going to do this. And then people, oh, that sounds great. You go, all of that. At the end of the day, what does it mean if we don't act? And it says here, it's useless. It's quite strong, really, isn't it? It's quite a strong, we know it's true, but we don't really want to hear that. And it's basically saying that, when our speech doesn't accord with our actions, it's kind of a bit meaningless. It's also where, we say we're going to do something and we don't do it as well. I remember going through a time in my own meditation life where I was meditating quite intensively, going on some of these intensive retreats, and came off a retreat and continued to really quite intensively practice. And then I started having really very, very strong dreams. And I'm sort of used to having strong dreams actually, but these dreams were the kind of dreams where I'd wake up and it would take me ages to just come back to myself. I was just going to completely other worlds that weren't familiar to me. And then normally when I'd have strong dreams, I would think, okay, just meditate and calm yourself down and, get into myself, as it were. But then my meditation practices also became really unusual as well. And I recognized after some time that I was sort of entering in my dream life and in my meditation life. And then it started happening in my waking life. I was just entering different states of consciousness, which I just didn't know what to do with. It was completely out of my experience. And I started talking to people, like more experienced people than me, friends, like, what should I do with this? I literally didn't know. And it got to the point where I'd be getting nervous about going to bed because I just didn't know what was going to happen in the night, I didn't also got to the point, which had never happened to before, where I was nervous about sitting to meditate as well. And finally, somebody said, well, why don't you go to see Bhante, Bhante Sankarachita? And I thought, yeah, that's what I need to do. I need to go and see my teacher. So I wrote to him and he was great. He kind of saw me fairly quickly. And I told him all the things that had been happening. And he said, I said, what should I do? And he said, well, do this practice. He gave me a new practice to do. I'd been doing one practice and he said, stop doing that, do this one. And I thought, okay. I wasn't actually drawn, I knew about the practice, but I wasn't drawn to it before that. But I thought, he's giving me the practice, I'll do it. I have to say, I went to, as soon as I did the practice, somebody else led me through it, so I knew exactly how to do it. And as soon as I sat to do the practice, my experience completely changed. All the disturbing aspects of it completely went. It was unbelievable. So that was one outcome. But when I was meeting him, because I was a bit probably thinking, oh, I don't know, will that work? I don't know if that practice, I'll try it, but I'll see. So I said to him, okay, I'll do the meditation practice, but is there anything else I can practically do to help? I want to be practical as well. So I said, is there anything else I could do just to kind of, make sure that, I learn what I need to learn and grow from this experience. So he looked at me and for some time and then said, yes. And I was like, okay, well, like want to write it down like the guru tells you, as it were. He said, always do what you say you're going to do. And I was like, well, what's actually, I just thought, that ain't no big teaching. That's kind of easy. I think I do that anyway. And what's that got to do with what I've just told you? It didn't seem to really relate, actually. But I am trying to be dutiful. I thought, okay, I'll try it. And I think I already do that anyway. I think I already do what I say I'm going to do. I think I already do that. And if I don't, it's just a few little tweaks here and there. Anyway, what I will report is 20 plus years later, I'm still working at that teaching. Because what I realize is that, there's so much more to it than what it appears. It was very much like it's like this saying, like a beautiful flower, brightly colored, without scent, even so useless is a well-uttered speech of one who does not act accordingly. I realized that I would say things like, oh yeah, give me 5 minutes. And it would be 15, it would be 20. I'd say, yeah, I'll give you a ring next week. And then, I might not give them a ring next week. I'd also go like, yeah, I'm definitely gonna change that. I'm really gonna start getting up early and I'd set some intention basically. And then how many days, weeks later, it would wane. Yeah. So I then thought, oh, it's actually not that easy to do what you say you're going to do. I realized actually to do that, you need to be fairly well integrated. You need to know yourself really, really well. Because I could also see other friends of mine who are a bit more, I'm sort of more of an artistic bent, as it were, probably. But other friends of mine were very much more, ordered, if you like, structured, and they would, more than me, probably do what they say they were going to do. But then they would do it with gritted teeth sometimes, or resentful, or be not really engaged. So I thought that's not the answer either, to just go, well, I've said it, so I'm going to do it. And it might also, the thing might not be appropriate anymore, because things change. So I thought, there's, it's not just about just pushing through either. One has to know oneself really well. We have to sort of know the situation pretty well as well. We have to know others that are involved and then act accordingly. So this is why, and then actually I thought that's where wisdom is, isn't it? When you're doing wise action is where you're acting for the benefit of yourself and others. And it's constructive and it's creative and it's appropriate. And that's really difficult. So that simple thing about always do what you say you're going to do is definitely not simple. It wasn't for me, at least. And that's why, because I realize it's wise action, that's why I'm still practicing it. I've gotten better, but still a few years later. So that's that one. And then, of course, when there's a real disparity between what somebody says and what somebody does, it's deeply disappointing, isn't it? It's disheartening, it's disappointing. It kind of makes us lose sense of who we are as human beings and who we can be as human beings as well, which is why people are so, disillusioned sometimes by politics, because you get we're going to do this and we're going to do this and we're going to do this and we're going to do this. And then it's like, it doesn't happen. So you think, So in a way, the opposite is true. If we, which is this saying, like a beautiful flower, brightly coloured and scented, even so useful is a well-uttered speech of one who acts accordingly. When it all comes into alignment, when there's a well-uttered speech, like a wise speech, a beautiful speech, a helpful speech, fruitful speech, and there's action that follows that, wow, it shows us what we can be as human beings. and it shows us a possibility of change as well. So that's what we're trying to move towards. So what I saw then was this gap between who I thought I was. I thought, I think I do. I think I'm pretty, do what I do. Who I thought I was, and then who I then discovered myself to be when I began to reflect a bit more deeply. And when we experience that gap, it can be disheartening sometimes. It can be even humiliating, when we say, gosh, I thought I was this kind of person. And I realize, because I've been meditating, because I see myself a bit more clearly, I see my conditioning a bit more now. I realize that's not really who I am. And it can be a bit of a shock. And sometimes I think people stop practicing or stop meditating at that point because they it's not, either think it's not working, or I can't do it, or it's simply too hard, or I just don't want to see that. I want to, just have this image of that I used to have of myself. So I say, when we have that experience of seeing the gap between where we are and where we would like to be, or where we thought we were, when we see that gap, then embrace it. Because actually within that gap is also where we're getting a sense of what our potential is too. We're getting a sense of what is possible for us, rather than it feeling disheartening. So we might be disheartened, but actually the fact that we see there's a gap means that there's somewhere to move towards. We think, oh, okay, I'm not here, I'm here. So what would it be like if I moved towards here? I would actually grow. I'd become a bigger person. I'd become a wiser person, a more open person. So I embrace, when I discover those gaps, however uncomfortable it might be, I aim to embrace it now, because I think that is me growing if I keep moving towards that. I also think that, it helps us when we have other people that are, well, not only helps us, it's necessary to have other people who are further along than us as well, because we can then go, actually, they've been where I've been in this discomfort, this kind of seeing themselves a bit more clear, and look where they are now. So actually seeing other people further ahead than us kind of encourage us to fill that gap too, to move beyond that. So the next line I'm going to share with you comes from the penguin one. But before I share that, I'll just say this. When you see that you've got more to move towards, when you see your potential, what I hope, certainly what happens with me, it galvanizes me. It galvanizes my energy. I get inspired eventually once I'm over the shock of, I've got work to do. Then I get inspired, and particularly if there's other people further ahead than me, they're encouraging me. I get inspired and I want to work on myself. I want to achieve the thing that I've seen as possible. So I suddenly realize, gosh, there's work to do here. And it helps with this next statement, which is from the penguin. Think not of the faults of others, of what they have done or not done. Think rather of your own faults, of the things you have done or not done. Bhante says one should pay no heed to the faults of others. And why does that help? Because for me, when I think, gosh, there's more I need to do, in a way, I think there's so much more to me than I realise. There's so much more of conditioning to kind of explore and unpack. There's so much more of my qualities that I'm, just getting a sense of. I remember somebody saying to me, I was like, like that image of the iceberg, that usually is only a tip of the iceberg that's seen. Yeah. In a way, there's so much more of us. And she said to me, so much more to you than you realise, And I was like, really? It hadn't occurred to me, really. But there was so much more to me. And I thought, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. But to get there, we need to go beneath the sea. Yeah, we need to go beneath the sea to see all that's there. If we're really doing that, actually, we're not going to be as focused on other people's faults are we? Because we recognise we've got some of our own, we've got a lot of our own, but we also want to do something about that. So it sort of takes that sometimes fixation that we can have with other people away. So let me ask you this question. So I don't want to make any assumptions here. How many of you would say you don't really engage in criticising others? And be honest, if you think, I don't really do that, I don't really criticise other people. Okay, great, we've got one. Anyone else? I'll see you after. Anyone else? Okay, all right, so one brave soul, thank you for your honesty. How many then here would say, how many of you here would say you criticise other people more than yourself? Okay, thank you for your honesty. Another couple of people. Oh, three, good, yeah, I was going to say, plenty minus. I'm joking, we work together. And how many of you think you criticise yourself more than others? Okay, right. But basically, we do both. The fact is, there might be a slight tendency, to self or other, but actually we all do both, apart from if you don't think you do at the moment. So, and in a way, it's just helpful to get that barometer. I think I do it more for other people, or I do it more for myself. It's just a kind of helpful temperature check, really, because then we can go, okay, then I need to sort of remove some of that attention from others for a while, yeah. But if we think we do it more for ourselves, okay, I need to improve my self-metta. We did the metta bhavana practice today, which is a great practice. We need to improve my self-metta, or we might need to work on the difficult person stage a bit more if we think we focus a bit more on others. Sometimes you'll find we're just swinging from one to the other, actually. We might have phases in our life, times in our life where we're a bit more focused on self-critique. We might have times in our life where we're more focused on others, or we might just fluctuate through the day. But most people will engage in criticism. It's a very human thing to do, actually. Our ordinary mind, that's what it does. It's differentiating all of the time. And this comes to a fundamental wrong view that we have, that we're separate from other beings, that we have this sense of being separate, that you're over there and I'm here and you're very different to me and I'm very different to you. So because of that sort of that sort of what's it called? That sort of duality, the duality that's sort of set up. We're always projecting one way or the other. We're always looking out and going, they're over there, I'm here. This is what I think. This is what I'm doing. You're doing this, and it just lends itself to finding fault one way or the other. Even if it's a subtle finding fault, it lends itself to that. And sometimes we're just projecting. We're just projecting our own, lack of self-metta on others when we're doing that outwards. And other times we're absorbing the negativity of others as well and making ourselves, feel sort of bad. Or we just inherited lots of negative thoughts from the past. So the way forward here is to recognize that back to the lotus, back to our lotus pond. We are all, on some level, we've all come from this mud of conditioning. We've all got this suffering. We've all got these biases and prejudices and, ideas about things. None of us, unless we're enlightened, none of us are seeing the world as it really is. So we've all come from that, but we've all got this potential as well. So it's not about, when Bhante says pay no heed to the fault of others, it's not saying we just turn a blind eye, not saying let's just ignore it either, because we all have an effect on each other, right? And we don't, as Buddhists anyway, or as practitioners, people wanting to grow, we don't want to cause harm, and we don't want harm to be caused. So if we see that, ourselves or other people are doing something, we might need to call it out. We might need to support somebody to change. We might need to, recognize that something needs to be stopped, or try and create change in a situation where there is harm. So it's not about we ignore it in that way. But it is about not fixating on it, not ruminating on it, not reducing that person, if we're criticizing others, to that fault. And it's not reducing ourselves to our faults either. It's classic, isn't it, that we could have a whole room of people who go, "Oh, I thought you were great. That was so brilliant the way you did that." And one person says something negative or slightly critical, and we just fixate, right, on that one person. So we have this sort of negativity bias, really, basically within us, most of us. So it's not about ignoring it. But it is about not fixating, not ruminating, not reducing ourselves or other people to the faults that might be there. And when I say faults, it just means how our conditioning is showing up in a way that might not be helpful at that time. That's really what it is. So what Bhante says is, this is one of my favourite quotes on him, and he talks about metta, loving kindness practice. And he says, essentially, friendship within the spiritual community is based on metta, on an appreciation of the other person's virtues, their qualities, and faults alike. Feeling metta does not blind you to the facts. If someone is greedy or stupid, you see that they are. But with metta, you can always see through that greed or stupidity to the beauty of the human being. It is through metta that you can hold the two together, the ugly truth and the beautiful reality. Indeed, if you don't see the one, you won't really see the other, not clearly anyway. We're flawed human beings, really, but we're seeking the light. And, if we can hold the two together, we can, recognize the different stages that we're all at, not condemn any of us, ourselves, or others, not reduce each other to what's difficult, to our suffering. We can see that, encourage, inspire, support, hold accountable where that needs to be, knowing that we're all seeking the light of truth, the light of love. And he says it in the spiritual community because obviously that's where there's an intention to grow there. Okay, last one. Last saying is this: the bee takes the essence of a flower and flies away without destroying its beauty and perfume. So let the sage wander in this life. So the bee takes the essence of a flower and flies away without destroying its beauty and perfume. So let the sage wander in this life. I think just going back to the last thing around holding, ourselves with metta and each other with metta. It's a recognition, as we heard in the tea break, that life is short. We don't know how long we've got. We also don't know what suffering has led to somebody behaving in the way that they might be behaving if it's difficult. And we're still exploring why we behave the way we do when things get really difficult as well. What we do know is life is short. And if we can, keep proceeding with metta, keep sort of discovering the truth of things, keep opening to the light, what eventually happens is like we're able to engage in life, engage in relationships, engage in communication in a way that, is less harmful. In a way that actually appreciates the experience that we're having, whatever it's like, appreciates the experience, sees the truth in the experience, takes a sort of learning from the experience, but doesn't feel like it needs to hold on to it, doesn't feel like it needs to destroy it, consume it, And we become like this, the saying says, the bee going from flower to flower, really engaging. Like when you see a bee in a flower, it really is in that flower, isn't it? It's really connecting with it, it's really having a whole experience, yeah? But then it lets go and it moves, on to next. But it's nourishing. It's a nourishing experience. It's not a consuming one. It doesn't destroy any of it. It's life-giving. So in a way, that's what metta does. That's what truth does. It gives life. It sees, it sees what really is happening in situations. It sees it's, you see oneself more clearly with metta. You see other people more clearly with metta. You see the truth, and then you're able to engage more and more as time goes on in a way that causes less harm, but is much more life-giving, like the bee moving from flower to flower. And then we let go. Eventually you have to learn to let go of it all, because life is short. Yes. And then just lastly, the last line, actually, I will share this, is that Bhante is saying now, a translation. He says, "Who shall conquer the earth and the realm of death? Who shall make out the well-taught verses of truth as an expert picks flowers? The learner, who is that? That's us, shall conquer the realm of death. The learner shall make out the well-taught verses of truth as an expert picks flowers." So we're all learners on this path. We've got the teachings, and it's about us choosing the teachings that will help us, where we are now. Sort of being open to the teachings, reflecting on the teachings, choosing the ones that's going to move us on. Not everyone will, not all the teachings will be appropriate or will support you, but some will be absolutely exactly what you need. And it is like this expert, picking the right flower for the right occasion, with the right scent and the right shape, for the right person. It's a bit like that, when the teachings really land, when you allow them really in, it really is like a personal, like somebody's handed you a flower that you think, oh, this is exactly, what I needed. A bit like right at the beginning when I talked about that one flower that lasted for weeks. It was interesting that it was a white flower that lasted, and I thought, oh yeah, I'm at the beginning of something. I'm at the beginning of this role. It's a white flower that's lasted. I really took that in. So when we take a teaching, it becomes very personal to us, and we can speak to it in a way, bringing our experience to bear. And it is like, we've plucked a flower that is just for us from the wealth of flowers, that are in the teachings. That's all I have to say tonight. Thank you. So please, yes, keep going and keep growing, and I look forward to coming back here again. Sorry. And how do we end this evening?
Putting away the mats and cushions.
Sorry? Put away your mats and cushions. Thank you very much, and thank you online as well.